My first impressions of Vodou were as negative as anybody else's. I thought it was very dangerous. I thought it was evil somehow, that it would jeopardize my soul to even talk about it. And then I started to ask myself why I was so afraid of something that I didn't know anything about.
If you've wanted yet feared to do work that is weird, this is the show you just need to hear.
Vodou, not to be confused with voodoo, its bastardized Hollywood doppelganger. Vodou is a religion, albeit a gravely misunderstood one. Today, I talk with Sallie Ann Glassman, a Vodou Priestess. She tells me about her journey from being a Ukrainian-American Jewish woman living in Maine to becoming a Vodou Priestess in New Orleans. And we talk about the initiation ceremony in becoming a Vodou Priestess. It's a process that's shrouded in mystery, but Sallie Ann peels back the curtain just enough to give me a peek at the spiritual and physical gauntlet she went through. And all those Hollywood voodoo myths? Oh yeah, we go there. And we even get into what it's like to be under a possession trance. I'm your host, Sam Balter, and this is Weird Work.
Now let's listen to them speak about their jobs, which are quite unique. Weird Work.
First question, kind of a big one. What is Vodou?
So Vodou is actually a religion, and it's a way of approaching life and living. It's a philosophy, but it's actually a bona fide religion. It fulfills the requirements of a religion. There's a sense of metaphysical deity, spirit, and there are practices and principles around that belief. Vodou was really carried on the backs of slaves to the New World, to Saint-Domingue, as Haiti was called at the time, and Louisiana colony, and mingled with European Catholicism and Native American practices. And there was even a three-penny opera kind of burlesque show that was going on and contributed some of the characteristics of a couple of the spirits.
I want to go a little bit more about just the structure of the religion. So at a top level, is it monotheistic? Is it polytheistic?
You know, you can make a case for Vodou being both monotheistic and polytheistic. There is a recognition of a supreme deity called Bon Dieu, or Grand Maître, good God, or the Grand Master. But we humans are limited in our capacity to comprehend God.
Okay.
And to relate to God. So between God and humanity are a large number of intermediary and ancestral spirits, and they're collectively referred to as the Loa. And some of these spirits come into being, develop over time, some get forgotten. They are all both archetypal principles as well as forces of nature. So just for example, Ogu is the warrior spirit, and he is the patron of iron, that's his metal, and he relates to fire in the elements, and he is a leader of men in terms of psychology.
Okay.
So he has all these different aspects, and the idea is that each of these spirits, who were once living people, their ancestors, they've died, they've got an elevated perspective on life because they have survived death, we could say. They've gone through that initiation. And they're also in the world around us. So they're the water that we bathe in, and the air that we breathe, and the earth that we walk upon, and the fire that heats us. And the whole world is an aspect of God's life force.
So it sounds like there's a supreme being, but it's not like Christianity or, some other religions where I might be able to communicate with the supreme being. It's like there's a lot of intermediaries who were, it sounds, I don't know, are they like angels who used to be people and then have changed? Would that be a good analogy or a poor one?
I think that's a decent analogy.
Okay.
In the way that people think of angels, you might think of them as saints, but with that added attribute of being natural forces as well. Airsley is love and beauty, but she's also fresh water.
Okay.
So it's sort of an additional aspect to them.
Uh,
And they're seen as spirits rather than gods, so they're served rather than worshipped.
do they have human attributes like the way Greek gods do, where, like they get angry at times and like they might, do something wrong and are fallible and things like that? Or are they all pretty positive?
They definitely have personalities, and some of those personalities are very benevolent and gentle. Some are fiery, revolutionary, angry. A perfect example, again, the spirit of love and beauty, Erzuli Freda Daomi. Her sister is Erzuli Dantor, who is the fiery, revolutionary aspect of love. And it was during a ceremony to serve Erzuli Dantor when a black pig was sacrificed that set off and really sustained the Haitian Revolution. So in Vodou, some of these spirits are really turbulent, some are really gentle, but none of them are seen as either good or bad. They're all seen as powerful and some aspect of God's divinity. And so the goal is to find balance between them all and to let them all express.
I'd love to talk a little bit more about your journey. When did you first encounter Vodou?
I don't know exactly when I first heard the word. It's just out there, and we all take in usually very negative, derogatory images of Vodou, and you don't even know where it started. So
Okay.
my first impressions of Vodou were as negative as anybody else's. I thought it was very dangerous. I thought it was evil somehow, that it would jeopardize my soul to even talk about it. And then I started to ask myself why I was so afraid of something that I didn't know anything about. And I realized that I'm often afraid of the things that are offering me tools to my own power and freedom.
And were you religious before you got into Vodou?
I was always very spiritually oriented.
Okay.
As far back as I can remember, I saw the world as not a very solid place. I didn't literally see physical solid objects as very solid. Instead, I saw a sort of wavery mirror image over what looks like flows of energy to me.
Is there anything that happened that sort of expedited your interest in Vodou?
Well, initially, I just communicated directly with spirits that maybe other people didn't see. I got very involved in yoga when I was 16, and I've done yoga every day since then. I'm 63 now. And I came to New Orleans in 1976 because my brother had called me and told me he had a job teaching at Tulane University here. And something in my head just thought voodoo and jazz would be really interesting.
So where were you living then?
I was living in Kennebunkport, Maine, in my cousin's unheated barn, and it was October 1st and 20 degrees. And I knew I had to go somewhere, but I had no idea where I was going to go. And this phone call precipitated a rather hasty move to New Orleans with my sheepdog and my bird. And I found voodoo and jazz very interesting. I met a man from Martinique named Andre, who kind of took me under his wing. He worked at the Voodoo Museum and started teaching me a few things. I joined a magical fraternal order and became pretty highly initiated in that order, but it didn't really speak to me. I think much more of a mystic than a magician.
So you just got this like call at one point that your brother was moving down. You moved down with him, and then basically just kind of found your way into this community step by step.
Step by step. I was a bartender for 28 years. So, it's an interesting irony that I was serving a different kind of spirits to people and also serving another kind of spirits.
Do you have a mentor or a teacher or anybody who kind of took you under their wing to guide you through Vodou?
Ultimately, I met a woman in my neighborhood who was the president of an Amphora, a Voodoo community in Haiti. And she asked me if I wanted to come with her to Haiti to observe a ceremony. And I went to her house to discuss the possibility. The phone rang, and it was a mutual friend in Haiti saying that the man who would become my mentor there had spoken with the Loa, with the Vodou spirits, and they told him that I ought to just come and initiate. And I literally didn't know any better. So I said, sure, okay. And
Okay.
I thought I was taking some preliminary initiation, but he actually initiated me to Mambo Asagwe, which is the full priesthood.
Oh, so you thought you were just going into like a starter, like
Sure.
small
Yeah.
initiation, and then he's like, okay, you're ready for the full thing.
Right. And he was just the most magnificent old man. I will never forget meeting him for the first time. I was riding in a friend's sports car in Port-au-Prince, and for anybody who's never been there, my papa lived in a neighborhood called Bel Air, which is in no way similar to Bel Air, California.
No.
And it's seriously impoverished. And I was literally trying to figure out what was house and what was rubble as we're
Oh my
driving through the
God.
streets.
And you're
And
driving in a sports car?
I'm in a sports car, in the back seat of a little tiny sports car. Now, my papa, as I call him, Edgar, he was about 7 feet tall, very thin, very dark skin and glittery eyes, and he had a voice that could shake the earth like a didgeridoo. So I'm sitting in the back seat of this car, and the car stops, and this person folds himself down into the seat next to me. It wasn't that easy for him to fit in the back seat of a little sports car. And I knew this person would never again be out of my mind. And lo and behold, he has never left my mind since then. He's absolutely a part of who I am. He changed my life. I would go to Haiti and stay in his temple and serve there and study. And he would come to New Orleans and stay in my home and teach us and do ceremony with us, lead initiations. He was amazing. And after the earthquakes in Haiti, we managed to get him on a supply flight on the way out of Haiti.
Yeah.
And he spent about 3 months with us. And then his eldest child died in Haiti.
Oh,
And the family insisted that he go back for the funeral. And, he was very frail at that point. He'd been pretty sick, and he lasted about a month. But all I could say about it was that he lived a really good life, and he had an excellent death. He died in his bed, asleep at night in his home, surrounded by people that he knew and loved. So it was an exemplary life story.
yeah. It sounds like an amazing person.
Yeah, he continues to come and visit us from time to time.
Oh, that's
So
great.
even though I miss him terribly, we do get to hang out.
And is that kind of relationship between having like a mentor and a mentee, or somebody who kind of takes you under their wing as a priest or priestess of Vodou, is that common?
I think it is. I was really blessed to have the mentor that I had.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that was outstanding about him is I'm white, I'm Ukrainian American, I'm Jewish, I'm vegan, I don't sacrifice animals. And Edgar's attitude was always that the spirit chooses whom it will, and who is he to interfere with that? He absolutely accepted me as his daughter, and I called him my papa, and that was our relationship. A lot of people have thought that he would never have shown a white American the same things that he would teach someone else. And what Edgar would always say to me is, I'm going to give you everything I know. And that's what he did. That was a pretty awesome gift.
With the other people who were practicing Vodou in Haiti, I don't know, was it a little bit weird between you being a white Ukrainian Jewish lady and then the rest of the community? Like, even if your papa was so welcoming,
Yeah.
was everybody else?
Pretty much, actually. I know that there are people who feel very differently, and I understand that. There's certainly a lot of people in the US who feel very differently and are pretty upset with me. And I get that. White people have taken everything from Black people. It was a religion that came out of slavery. So I completely understand that. In Haiti, I'd have just a couple of almost humorous encounters. There was a Mambo there who was pretty intimidating. She was a fierce Mambo and really talented.
What made her so intimidating?
She was big, she was powerful, she could wring the neck of a chicken, pluck it, and have it in the pot cooking in like 60 seconds.
And you're vegan.
And I'm vegan. She was amazing. And she didn't really, when I first went to Haiti, I thought that I could get by with French, and I discovered that people in the Vodou community speak Haitian Creole, not French. So I had a hard time at first understanding people. And by the time I met this particular Mambo, I could hear her say, she'd look at me and say to her friends, white people make me sick, they give me a headache. She would say in Haitian Creole, and I'd be just like, oh Lord. And at the end of the time that I spent with her, I mean, we were learning songs, we were learning dances. There was one very intense ceremony, and she said in Creole that she needed a knife, and I instantly handed it to her, not even translating, I just handed it to her. And she looked in my eyes, and I could see she realized I heard what she said. I understood what she said about white people giving her headache. But I just sort of smiled, and we went on. And by the last day that I spent with her, we were all dancing and singing. It was like a 14-hour ceremony that was going on and on and on. And I'm very self-conscious. And so I'm thinking, oh Lord, she's just horrified at me dancing. And finally she looked up and she said in Creole, the white Mambo can dance. I figured I'd won her over.
So can you tell me a little bit more about what this initiation ceremony is?
Mm-hmm. There's a lot I can't say because you take oaths before the spirit to keep most of it secret, but it's called coucher, which means to go to sleep or to put to bed. And you're laying on your left side for 6 days. And you're told to dream. And there are occasional ceremonies that punctuate those 6 days that are very intense. And the rest of the time, from the minute I went in there, I couldn't tell if I was dreaming, hallucinating, having visions, if things were really happening that I thought were happening.
Go in where? Like, where?
You're in an isolation chamber, basically.
Oh, like a big room?
Small room, actually.
Small room.
And I felt like I was being stripped of everything that I used to identify myself. So emotionally and psychologically and physically and spiritually, I was just really raw. And one night I was going through a dark night of the soul that, I was just thinking, you are the most sorry excuse of initiate on the planet Earth. And you're such a failure, and what do you think you're doing? And the Loa have no use for you. And Edgar came in. And I couldn't tell if he was really there or if I'd imagined him, but he talked with me for a couple of hours. And at the end of that conversation, I was able to crawl back down off the ceiling and was able to say to the spirit that, okay, this is me, this is what I've got, these are my strengths, these are my weaknesses, and just do with me what you can. And it saved me, and it gave me the power to come through the initiation. The day after the initiation, Edgar came to the place I was staying at that point. And I told him that I had seen him and had this conversation and asked him if he was really there. And he said, I was there, all right. And he continued to launch into every subject that we talked about. Now, the weird thing is, Edgar spoke only Haitian Creole. He didn't speak French, he didn't speak English. I spoke French and English, and we understood each other perfectly, both times. And I had a friend that I was staying with who heard the whole conversation. He couldn't believe it, that the two of us speaking in different languages and completely communicating and understanding each other.
Oh my God. I went recently to an art exhibit where you just sat in a room that was totally dark for like, I don't know, maybe 10, 15 minutes or so. And even that was a pretty intense experience of just like 10 or 15 minutes.
And this initiation, I think, is symbolic of the experience in the Middle Passage, that you're in the hull of some slave ship and your life is not your own anymore. You're in the hands of other people and you don't know where it's going. You don't know. I mean, when I first went, I didn't know anybody there.
Yeah. And I wonder, like, before you went down to Haiti for this initiation ceremony, what did your family think about this? Did you talk to them about kind of moving away from Judaism or like moving to this?
My parents were actually both hardcore atheists.
Oh, okay.
And they had been very concerned when I was younger that I was into what I called things. And my father even required that I write an essay about my beliefs because he was so alarmed that I was spiritually oriented. And he was great about it. When I gave it to him, he said that he agreed with some things, he disagreed with some things, he didn't understand some things, but he was just glad that I was thinking. And that's all he was concerned about, that I wasn't becoming mesmerized with some cult or something. But both of my parents had passed by the time I went to Haiti.
I absolutely love that your dad made you write an essay. I don't know why. I just think that's so funny that like, okay, if you're going to get into these things, like I'm going to need some reasons.
But I have an uncle, or had an uncle, who was a Kabbalist, which is Jewish mysticism, Kabbalah.
Oh, yeah.
And he was heading to Israel to speak to the Rabbinical Council. And that morning, I was on the front page of the New York Times because I had done a ceremony in the street to fight crime in my neighborhood, and it made the front page of the New York Times. And he called me to say how proud he was of the work I was doing, and he was going to go show the Rabbinical Council and talk to them about how Jews today are interfacing in community and in urban settings. And so I was just really blessed with a very accepting and genuinely spiritual family. I think they weren't locked into any particular religious dogma.
Speaking of like sort of some of the aspects of Vodou, I'd like to just kind of do a quick rapid fire questions along some of the myths, some of the preconceptions about it. So I'm not to get, I'm going to try not to be offensive or say anything too stupid. But just if you could give me some basic answers.
Okay.
Cool. Okay. Voodoo dolls. Are you sticking pins in dolls and sending people curses?
Nope. That's the quick answer. In Haiti, nobody uses voodoo dolls. There are no pins stuck in anything. You might see a doll on an altar, but it's representing a spirit in the same way that a sculpture on a Catholic altar would represent a saint.
Do you perform any black magic?
I do not. And I would consider even people's ideas of doing a love spell to force somebody to fall in love with you, I consider that black magic.
Okay, so no black magic, and you even take kind of even a harder stance on what counts as black magic. Okay.
That's right.
Cannibalism.
Cannibalism? I'm a vegan.
This sounds like it's going to be a hard no.
This is a hard no. Do you want the explanation behind that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
A little more involved. In the early days of the colonies in Saint-Domingue, the Spanish Inquisition that had already used these really vilifying, ugly images about Jews applied those same images to Afro-Caribbeans. So they slaughter babies and they eat them and they have depraved orgies. They, all of that stuff.
Classic things for Jewish people.
Yeah, they're really effective, though. It's hard to get that out of your head once you've seen that. And then finally, Hollywood, nailed the coffin.
Yeah.
it sells more tickets. It gets more butts and seats to talk about zombies and cannibalism or whatever else.
Are you worshiping the devil?
One time when I was in Haiti, that's going to be a hard no too, but one time when I was in Haiti, I met a wonderful priest and artist named Andre Pierre. And he told me he had a portrait of the devil in his hut. And he was going to show it to me. So he went back in his hut and came out and he said, "Here's a portrait of the devil." And he opened up a dollar bill and he said, "Your religion is the economy and you worship the devil." And it's like, got us there.
So, U.S. economy, yes to devil worship.
Yeah.
Vodou, hard no.
Hard no. Yeah.
Okay, let's see. Sacrifices.
So sacrifice means to make sacred. And this is where I'm extremely controversial because I don't sacrifice animals. I don't do blood sacrifices. And for a lot of people, the Loa, the spirits, need life force to walk across. They need the blood. Even when they're the most bloodthirsty spirits and they're showing up in Haitian people that are participating in the ceremony, and I ask them if they're okay with the offerings that I've given, and they say, yeah, just give something that means the same to you.
So you do some sacrificing, but not animals.
Right.
But other people do animals.
Yes.
But not humans.
Not humans that I know of.
Okay. Last one of kind of the rapid fire myth section.
Okay.
Voodoo or Vodou?
Voodoo, spelled Voodoo, is the Hollywood tourist idea. The voodoo dolls, all of that stuff you just listed.
Yeah, all the myths I've been going through. That's voodoo.
Yeah, and is confused with hoodoo, which is a magical folk practice of spellcraft using herbs and roots and things like that. Vodou, Vodou, and there's also other spellings, but that's the Haitian Creole spelling, is the religion.
Oh, okay, this has been good. I feel like we've knocked off like a bunch of bullshit myths and things like that we need to get through. What is a possession trance?
So I can describe for you what it feels like to me. What I always say to people is that I'm an initiated Mambo Asagwe, and that only means that I'm an authority on my experience of voodoo. I'm not the authority on all of voodoo. So in my experience, there'll come a point in the ceremony where visually everything is reaching hyper clarity. It's like you're seeing it in a crystal ball, and time is altering. So time seems to be slowing down. Things seem to be moving in slow motion. I get an elongated view of where my perception is centered. So I feel like I'm incredibly tall looking down at somebody else's feet. And being a neurotic Jew, I usually have a whole conversation with myself about, this isn't really happening. You just need attention. You know, you're really pathetic and sad. And
so you're like still pretty cognizant. You're still like thinking and have a kind of track going on in your head while this is all happening.
Right. There's somebody in me observing what's happening. And at some point, that conversation gets so irritating that I just kind of shut it down and focus on serving my community that's in the temple with me and serving the Loa. That there's a point of agreement, I guess you could say, where I shut down that little voice in my head and just let it fry out. And the next thing you know, everybody's staring at you and you're in a completely different place physically than you were before. You have no memory of what happened during possession trance. But I do feel a kind of physical sense of awe in my body. And I feel like my electromagnetic frequency has been altered, that it's been revved up. It feels different. And the paramount thing is that you can feel that something special, something elevated is happening, and you can feel the energy of it.
Like as an observer, I would be able to sort of feel like the shift in energy in a room.
And I would think so, yeah.
And people are being possessed by spirits in this situation, or?
Yes.
Okay.
And we've all got in our heads, when you hear possession, you're
Yeah.
thinking of demonic possession, and you're
Yeah.
thinking
I'm
about
thinking about The Exorcist.
It's not like that. And I don't feel that I'm being shut down or shut out or compressed in any way. There's nothing evil about it. It's more like an expansion. And I get really tired sometimes of seeing the world in the way that I do. And being possessed by various different spirits over a period of time and seeing the world through their perspective is very convincing that we're all interpreting all the time, and that it's actually, to me, really healthy to be able to put aside that hold that my normal identity has over me.
I don't know, like thinking about the stigma of it, the exorcist view where, you're being possessed, the devil's making you do horrible stuff, to the way you describe it as a way of kind of like elevating, opening up your mind, getting away from yourself, and in some ways shedding a lot of that ego. Mm-hmm. It just seems to be so radically different than our perceptions.
Exactly. And if there's one thing I could say to people, is just throw away everything you think you've ever heard or know about Vodou and experience it. That's why I do a lot of public ceremony, and why the public is always welcome at my ceremonies, because I can sit here defending Vodou and apologizing for it till I'm blue in the face, but until somebody actually experiences it and realizes that it's experienced as a blessing, not as an evil thing, nothing replaces that experience. It has to be firsthand.
And if I do create an altar to my ancestors, should I leave some of the food and things that they like?
Absolutely.
So like my uncle, great uncle Joe, huge fan of sauerkraut. I should just leave him like a jar of sauerkraut would be great.
I'd do it.
Okay. Okay. Well, I just want to say thank you so much, Sallie, for being on the show. This is a 180 for, I think, probably a lot of people who might have heard of voodoo or Vodou and have like this Hollywood conception of it. And I think you've just done such a tremendous job of showing like how it's an interesting religion, how it's so thought-provoking, and how it's so like positive for you as an individual and, you spiritually as well.
Oh, thanks for the opportunity.
Hey, thanks for listening. Sallie Ann's pretty amazing, right? If you liked this episode or any of our other episodes, give us a review over in the iTunes store. It really helps in getting the word out. And you can find us on Facebook and Twitter at Weird Work. Send us a message and let us know who you think we should have on the show next. We always love hearing from you guys. Okay, that's all. See you next week.